I stood right there, watching them laugh together. And that's when I realized I no longer belonged. The room was full of laughter, but I had never felt so alone. They weren't being cruel. They just didn't notice me anymore. I smiled as they laughed, but inside something quietly broke. That laughter wasn't meant to hurt me, but it showed me my place. I didn't leave the room, but somehow I was already gone. I still remember that evening very clearly. Not because something loud happened. Not because someone shouted or slammed a door. But because of how quiet everything felt inside me. They were sitting there together, my son, Saad, and his wife, Sanaa. They were laughing. It was not forced laughter, it was not polite laughter, it was the kind of laughter that comes from comfort. From belonging. From sharing a world that no one else can enter. I was sitting only a few feet away, on the same sofa and the same room, under the same roof I had lived in for years. Yet, in that moment I felt invisible. I looked at their faces. Saad's eyes were soft, the way they used to be when he was young. Sanaa leaned slightly toward him, her hand resting near his arm. They shared a joke I did not understand. Maybe I was never meant to. I smiled. Not because I felt happy, but because I did not know what else to do. Inside, something quietly shifted. It felt like standing outside a warm house on a cold night. You can see the light through the windows. You can hear the laughter. But the door is closed, and no one notices you standing there. That was the moment I realized something painful. Something I had been avoiding for a long time. I no longer belonged. I did not always feel this way. Once, this house echoed with my voice. With my worries. With my prayers. With my sacrifices. I raised Saad here. Every corner of this home held a memory of him growing up. His first steps. His first fever. His first heartbreak. I was there for all of it. When his father passed away, this house felt too big and too empty. But I stayed strong. For Saad. I became both mother and father. I learned how to be firm and gentle at the same time. I worked quietly. I prayed loudly. Everything I did was for my son. And when he grew up and married Sanaa, I believed my heart would grow bigger. I believed our family would grow closer. I told myself, this is how life moves forward. But life does not always move the way we expect. That evening, as their laughter filled the room, I felt a strange heaviness in my chest. Not anger. Not jealousy. Just sadness. The kind that sits silently. The kind that does not ask for attention. I told myself I was imagining things. I told myself I was tired. Old people think too much, I said to myself. So I stayed quiet. I watched Sanaa's face. She looked happy, confident, at ease. She belonged here now. I watched Saad, my son. The boy who once held my hand tightly when he was afraid. Now he did not even notice I was sitting there. That hurt more than any harsh words ever could. Later that night, when the house grew quiet, I stood alone in the kitchen. The clock ticked loudly. The same clock I bought years ago when Saad started school. I washed the cups they had used, 0.2 cups. Not 3. I paused for a moment, holding one in my hands. My reflection stared back at me in the glass. I looked older than I felt. I whispered to myself, when did I become a guest in my own home? No one answered. That night I did not sleep well. Memories kept visiting me. Moments I had ignored, little signs I had pushed aside. Sanaa gently closing doors behind her. Conversations stopping when I entered the room. Plans being made without asking me. None of it was cruel. That is what made it worse. It was quiet exclusion. And quiet pain is the hardest to explain. I want you to understand something. This story is not about blame, it is not about hatred. It is about realization. Sometimes, the most painful truth arrives without noise. It sits beside you. Laughs near you. That laughter stayed with me long after the room fell silent. Even when I lay down in my bed, even when the lights were off, even when my eyes were closed, I could still hear it. Not because it was loud, but because it reminded me of something I had lost. I turned to my side and stared at the wall. This room used to feel safe. This room used to feel like mine. Now it felt borrowed. I pulled the blanket closer around my shoulders. Not because it was cold, but because something inside me felt exposed. I remembered the days when Saad would knock before entering my room. "Mom, can I come in?" he used to ask. Now he did not knock that he did not need to. This house no longer moved around me that I moved around it. In the quiet of the night, my mind began to wander. I remembered Sanaa's first day in this house. She stood at the doorway, holding her small suitcase. Her eyes were careful, her smile was polite. I welcomed her with open arms, I truly did. I told myself, she is like my daughter now. I meant it. I showed her where everything was. The kitchen shelves, the prayer mats, the spare blankets. I told her stories about Saad as a child. How he refused to eat vegetables. How he cried on his first day of school. She laughed politely then too. But it was different. That laughter had space for me. This laughter did not. I asked myself a question that night, a question I had been avoiding. When did I stop being part of their world? There was no clear answer. In no single moment. It happened slowly. Like evening turning into night. You don't notice the darkness arrive. Until suddenly, it is there. The next morning I woke up early. I always do. Old habits do not leave easily. I went into the kitchen and started making tea. The kettle whistled softly. Waited. No footsteps came. I poured tea into 3 cups anyway, and my hands moved on their own. When I carried the tray to the living room, I realized something. They were not there. Their bedroom door was closed. I stood there for a moment, holding the tray. Then I quietly returned to the kitchen. I poured the extra tea down the sink. Felt like throwing away a part of myself. Later that day, Sanaa came into the kitchen. "Mom," she said gently, "we already had tea." He nodded. "Of course," I replied. My voice sounded calm. Even to me. She smiled and turned away. She did not notice how tightly I was holding the edge of the counter. I am not saying Sanaa was unkind. She was respectful, she spoke softly, she did everything right. And maybe that was the hardest part. Because how do you complain about silence? How do you explain absence? There were no harsh words, no fights. Just distance. That afternoon I sat by the window. Outside, children were playing. Their laughter rose and fell with the wind. I remembered Saad as a little boy. Running barefoot. Calling out to me. "Mom, look at me." I always looked. Now I was the one watching quietly. When Saad came home from work that evening, he greeted me warmly. "How was your day, Mom?" he asked. "It was fine," I replied. And it was. Fine is a safe word. It hides many things. He nodded and went to his room. Sanaa followed him. The door closed. Again. That night, the 3 of us sat together for dinner. The table was full. The plates were warm. But something was missing. Conversation moved between them. Plans. Work. Small jokes. Ate quietly. Once Saad looked at me and smiled. Smiled back. But the moment passed quickly. Like a visitor who does not stay. I wanted to say something. I wanted to tell him. I feel lonely. But the words stayed inside. Because I did not want to sound weak, I did not want to sound needy. I raised him to be strong. Independent. And now I was learning the cost of that strength. That night, as I washed the dishes, I heard them laughing again. This time from their room. Their door was closed. But the sound carried. Pause. Water ran over my hands, my fingers trembled slightly. I told myself, this is normal. Married couples laugh. They build their own world. I knew this. I supported this. So why did it hurt? I realized then that knowledge does not always protect the heart. You can understand something. Accept it. Even bless it. And still feel pain. I returned to my room and sat on the bed. The house felt quieter than usual. Not empty. Just quiet in a way that feels heavy. I picked up an old photo from my bedside table. Saad and me. He must have been 10 years old. his arm around my shoulder. Both of us smiling. I traced his face with my finger. "Where did I go wrong?" I whispered. The photo did not answer. Days passed. Nothing dramatic happened. That is the truth. No arguments, no accusations. Just moments. Moments when I realized I was no longer included. Moments when decisions were made without me. Moments when my presence was optional. One afternoon, Sana was planning something on her phone. I asked casually, "What are you planning, son?" She looked up surprised. "Oh, just something," she said. Then she smiled and went back to her screen. That smile told me everything. That evening they went out together. I watched them get ready. Sana adjusted her scarf. Saad checked his phone. They looked happy. They did not ask me if I needed anything. They did not say where they were going. They did not need to. I stood at the door as they left. "Take care," I said. They replied together, "You too, Mom." The door closed. I stood there for a long moment. Then I slowly turned and walked back into the house. The silence wrapped around me. I sat on the sofa where I had watched them laugh days before. The cushions still held their shape. Placed my hand there. It was cold now. That was when the realization settled fully in my heart. Not as a shock, but as a quiet truth. They were building a life together. And I was no longer part of the center of it. I was on the edges. Watching. Smiling. Letting go. I did not cry. Tears would have been easier. Instead, I felt something heavier. Acceptance mixed with sadness. Love mixed with loss. I want to tell you something important. This story is not about a bad it is not about a cruel daughter-in-law. It is about change. And how change can leave someone behind without meaning to. That night, as I lay in bed, I finally said the words out loud. Very softly. "So this is how it feels, to no longer belong." Before I tell you how I began to feel invisible, you must understand who we were before everything changed. We were not a broken family, that we were not unhappy. We were simple. And sometimes simple love hurts the most when it shifts. Saad was my only child. When people hear that, they often smile. They say, "Oh, then he must be very special." And he was. But being an only child also meant something else. It meant every dream I had, every fear I carried, every prayer I whispered at night was tied to him. When his father passed away, Saad was still young. I remember that day clearly. The house filled with people. Voices. Condolences. But Saad stood quietly beside me, his small hand slipped into mine. He did not cry. He just looked up at me and asked, "Mom, are you okay?" In that moment I realized something. I was raising a child who would learn to be strong very early. From that day on, life became about survival. I learned how to manage the house alone. How to make decisions without asking anyone. How to hide my tears so Saad would not see them. Every morning I woke up before the sun. Every night I went to bed after everyone else. I packed Saad's school bag, that I checked his homework, that I waited for him to come home. This house echoed with his footsteps. With his questions. With his laughter. I never felt alone then. Saad grew up gentle. He was not loud or demanding, he listened more than he spoke. Sometimes I worried he was too soft for the world. But I also felt proud. I taught him kindness, that I taught him respect. I told him, a real man does not forget his roots. He always nodded. As years passed, Saad became busy with studies and work. I watched him grow taller, stronger. The house changed with him. His room filled with books. His phone rang more often. But every evening he still sat with me. We drank tea together, we talked about small things. Those moments mattered to me more than I ever said. When the topic of marriage came up, I was nervous. Not because I did not want him to marry, but because I knew what marriage changes. Still I smiled. I told myself, a mother's job is to prepare her child to leave, even if the heart resists. When Saad told me about Sana, he looked uncertain. "Mom," he said one evening, "I think I have found someone." I listened carefully. He spoke about her calmly. her education, her nature. She is respectful, he said. She understands family. That last sentence stayed with me. I trusted Saad's judgment. And I trusted my prayers. The first time I met Sanaa, she sat across from me with her hands folded. She greeted me softly. I saw nervousness in her eyes. But also confidence. She was polite, well-spoken. I remember thinking, she will bring freshness into this house. I did not feel threatened. Felt hopeful. The wedding was simple. Family gathered, smiles were exchanged. I watched Saad as he sat beside Sanaa. He looked happy. And that made me happy. I placed my hand on his head that night and prayed for him. I prayed for peace in our home. When Sanaa came to live with us, I welcomed her openly. I showed her how things worked, that I told her where I kept important things. I tried not to interfere too much. I remembered my own early days as a daughter-in-law. How heavy expectations can feel. I told myself, give her space. First, things were smooth. We shared the kitchen. We shared meals. Sometimes we talked. Sometimes we stayed quiet. There was comfort in routine. Saad seemed relaxed. And that mattered to me. But slowly the rhythm changed. Not suddenly. Not sharply. Just slowly. Sanaa began organizing things her way. I did not mind. Then she began cooking separately sometimes. I did not question it. She and Saad spent more time in their room. I understood. Marriage needs privacy. I reminded myself of these things again and again. Yet there were moments that stayed with me. Small moments. Moments people often ignore. Once, I rearranged the living room cushions the way I always had. Later I found them moved back. No one said anything. Another time I prepared Saad's favorite dish. He smiled and said, "We already ate outside." Smiled back. But the food remained untouched. I started spending more time alone. Not because anyone asked me to. But because I felt in the way. The house felt busier, fuller. Yet I felt quieter. Sanaa was never rude. That is important to say. She addressed me respectfully. She did her duties. But there was a distance. Polite distance. The kind that keeps peace, but does not build closeness. Sometimes I tried to start conversations. I asked about her day, her family. She answered kindly. But our talks did not grow deeper. They stayed on the surface. Like water that never sinks into the soil. Saad too changed. Not intentionally. But noticeably. He still respected me. He still asked after my health. But he was no longer present the way he used to be. His mind was elsewhere. His world had expanded. And I was no longer at the center of it. I did not complain. I did not want to be that mother. The one who competes for attention. The one who demands importance. I told myself, this is how life goes. But understanding does not erase feeling. One evening I overheard Saad and Sanaa planning something. A small trip. Just the two of them. They spoke excitedly. I sat quietly nearby. They did not include me in the conversation. They did not need to. Still, something tightened inside me. I realized then that my role had changed. I was no longer needed in decisions. Only informed later. Sometimes, at night, I often sat alone in my room. Listening to the sounds of the house. The refrigerator humming. Footsteps moving past my door. I felt like a guest listening to someone else's life. I want to say this gently. I never wanted to be the center forever. I only wanted to feel included. To feel remembered. Sanaa and Saad were building their life. Brick by brick. And I was stepping back. Brick by brick. By the time I noticed how far I had stepped back, it felt too late to step forward again. That is how the setup of our story begins. Not with conflict. Not with blame. But with quiet shifts. With good intentions. With love that did not know how to share space. The distance did not arrive all at once. It grew the way shadows grow in the evening. Slowly. Quietly. Almost politely. At first I told myself I was imagining things. Old people often feel left out. I thought it is part of aging. But the heart knows when something is changing, even when the mind tries to protect itself. One morning, I woke up feeling unusually tired. My joints ached and my head felt heavy. I sat at the edge of my bed for a long moment, gathering strength. Then I slowly walked toward the kitchen. Sana was already there. She was preparing breakfast. The stove was on. The smell of tea filled the air. For a moment my heart felt lighter. I said softly, "Good morning, son." She turned and smiled. "Good morning, Mom." Her voice was kind. Always kind. But then she continued with what she was doing. I stood there unsure. In the past, Saad and I would sit together for tea. It was our small ritual. Now, Sana poured tea into 2 cups. She placed them neatly on a tray. Waited. She picked up the tray and called out, "Saad, tea is ready." They sat together at the table. I watched from the doorway. After a moment, Sana looked up and said, "Mom, did you already have tea?" Pause. "No," I replied gently. "Oh," she said, surprised. "I thought you had some earlier." She poured me a cup then. But something about that moment stayed with me. Not the tea, the assumption. These moments became more frequent. Small things. Quiet things. Sana began planning the household according to her rhythm. Meal times changed slightly. Shopping lists were made without asking me. I did not protest. I told myself she was young. She was adjusting. I did not want to interfere. But slowly I felt myself being edited out. Saad noticed nothing. Or maybe he noticed and did not know what to do. When I spoke to him, he listened. But his attention felt divided. His phone buzzed often. Messages from Sana, even when she was in the same house. Once, I asked him something while he was typing. "Saad, can you help me with?" "1 minute, Mom," he said. Just 1 minute. But that minute stretched. And the moment passed. I started choosing my words carefully. I stopped asking questions. I stopped sharing small thoughts. Because I did not want to interrupt. And slowly, silence became my habit. One afternoon, I noticed the cupboard had been rearranged. All the things I used daily were moved higher. I stood there reaching. My arm did not stretch as far as it used to. Sana entered the kitchen and noticed. "Oh, Mom," she said quickly. "I reorganized everything. It's easier this way." He nodded. "It looks nice," I said. She smiled. But later, when I tried to cook, I realized nothing was where my hands expected it to be. I felt clumsy in my own kitchen. That evening I mentioned it softly to Saad. "The cupboard feels different now," I said. He looked confused. "Oh, Sana likes things organized," he replied. "She means well, Mom." "I know," I said quickly. And that was the end of the conversation. But inside me something tightened. Days passed. The house remained peaceful. Too peaceful. Peace without connection can feel lonely. One night I felt unwell. My chest felt tight, my breathing felt shallow. I sat on my bed trying to calm myself. I thought of calling Saad. But then I heard laughter from their room. They were watching something together. Waited. The feeling passed slowly. I never told them. I began noticing how often I chose not to speak. Not because no one allowed me to. But because I did not want to disturb their happiness. And that is how invisibility grows. Another evening, relatives called unexpectedly. They said they were nearby and would visit. In the past, such news brought excitement. That day it brought tension. Sana looked concerned. "We didn't plan for guests," she said quietly to Saad. Saad glanced at me. I felt like I needed to apologize for something I did not do. "They are family," I said softly. "They will not stay long." Sana smiled, but it did not reach her eyes. The visit was polite. Formal. After they left, the house felt heavier. That night Saad spoke carefully. "Mom," he said, "maybe next time we can inform Sana earlier." I looked at him. "Of course," I replied. But inside I felt something break. This was my home too. Or at least it used to be. I started eating alone more often. Not intentionally, just quietly. Sometimes they ate earlier, sometimes later. Our schedules no longer met. The dining table felt like a place people passed by, not gathered around. One day, I overheard Sana talking to her mother on the phone. Her voice was low but clear. "Yes, Mom. It's fine, she is not difficult, just different." Different. The word echoed inside me. I did not listen further. I did not need to. I began spending more time in my room. Felt safer there. I arranged my small space carefully. My my photos my memories. This room slowly became my world. Sud noticed. "Mom, you stay in your room a lot," he said once. "I am comfortable there," I replied. He nodded. He did not insist. Sana and I spoke less. Not because of conflict, but because of distance. She did not ask me for advice that I did not offer it. We coexisted. That was all. Sometimes I caught Sana watching me, as if trying to understand me. But we never crossed that space between us. One afternoon I found a note on the fridge. It was written in Sana's handwriting. "Please do not move things without asking." I stared at it for a long time. I had moved a container slightly that morning. I felt embarrassed, shame, like a child being corrected. That evening I removed the note quietly. I did not mention it, but I stopped touching things. Saad became more protective of Sana. That is natural, but I felt like I was becoming something fragile, something that needed managing. One day Sana gently suggested something. "Mom," she said, "maybe it would be better if you rested more. I can handle the house." Her voice was respectful, but her words landed heavily. "Rest," as if my presence was tiring. He nodded. "Thank you," I said. From that day on I did less. And slowly I became less. The laughter continued. Their laughter. I heard it often. From the living room. From their room. It was not meant to hurt me, but it reminded me of my absence. One evening they sat together watching something funny. I sat nearby folding clothes. They laughed. I smiled quietly. No one looked at me. That was when the thought came clearly. Not angrily. Not bitterly. Just honestly. I am not part of this moment. And that realization hurt more than any argument ever could. Weeks passed. And the pattern became clearer. They laughed together, shared stories, made small plans. And I became part of the furniture. Not always ignored, not always excluded, but quietly, inevitably I was no longer in the center. One evening, Saad came home from work later than usual. I was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner. The knife felt heavier than usual. He entered, tired. "Mom, dinner soon?" he asked, and I nodded. Sana was in the living room, laughing at something on her phone. Saad glanced at her, smiled, and joined her. For a moment, the knife froze in my hand. They were laughing together. Just the two of them in my own home. I stood there quietly, chopping slower. I told myself it was fine. I told myself I understood. But inside, something quietly cracked. The next morning, I realized how much I had begun to step back. Breakfast was simple. I poured tea silently. Set the table. Everything arranged neatly. Saad sat down with a tired smile. Sana joined him. And we ate. But the conversation moved between them. Small jokes. Plans for the weekend. I added a comment here and there, a polite question. Passed unnoticed. Days turned into weeks. The subtle moments grew heavier. Sana began arranging the house more to her liking. She asked questions. "Mom, do you mind if I move these here?" And I nodded, afraid to protest, afraid to feel out of place. Sometimes she said, "Mom, I'll take care of this," as if my presence was optional. Saad began to seem distant too. He still asked after my health, he still checked in politely. But his attention now divided. He no longer sat with me quietly over tea. I no longer asked about my day. He laughed with Sana. Not at me, not including me. And I knew it was not intentional. It was the natural flow of life. But it hurt anyway. One rainy afternoon, I went to fold laundry. Saad and Sana were sitting near the window. They were joking about something only they understood. I paused, watched them for a moment, and quietly returned to my chores. No one asked me to join and no one insisted. And I did not speak. I was learning to disappear. The household became a choreography I was no longer part of. Sana cooked meals her way. Saad offered his opinions to her. Not me. I moved silently around the house. Everything I did now felt optional. Even when I entered a room, the laughter did not stop. It continued around me. One evening I tried to talk to Saad. "Son, do you need anything?" I asked. He looked at me tiredly. "No, Mom. We're fine," he said. Then he turned to Sana. They whispered something quietly. Their heads close together. I smiled quietly. But the thought echoed. I am no longer part of their private world. A few days later, I overheard something that pierced me more than words could. Sana was talking to her mother on the phone. "Yes, Mom, everything is fine," she said softly. "But she is kind, but sometimes different. Not difficult, just not part of us. Different." The word hit me like a small stone in water. Ripples. Quiet. Unstoppable. I did not listen further. I did not need to. That night I sat alone in my room. The house full of lights, laughter and movement. And I sat in silence. I held an old photo of Saad as a child, his tiny hand in mine. His soft laugh, the boy who needed me. I whispered to myself, this is the hardest part of love. Watching them grow, and being left behind. From that moment on, the small tensions became unbearable. I began noticing the little things. Cups moved without asking me. Food prepared without my input. Plans made quietly while I was elsewhere. Rooms I had once arranged now rearranged without discussion. Everything felt unspoken, yet very loud. Saad tried to balance it all. He was polite, caring and gentle. He smiled at me, checked on my health. But the emotional bond we had slowly faded. He was married, he belonged to someone else too. And I understood that. Logically. But the heart does not understand logic. I remember one night clearly. Sana and Saad were laughing in the living room. I sat on the sofa, quietly reading a book. I had nothing to contribute. Nothing to say. A joke passed between them that I did not understand it. And I smiled anyway. I heard Saad whisper, "That's so funny." And Sana laughed. I stayed silent. Because I realized. I was no longer included. I was no longer part of the small moments that build life together. I was invisible. It was in those small, quiet moments that the rising conflict became real. Not with words. Not with anger. Not with fights. But through absence, through exclusion. Through the slow realization that my place in this house had shifted. And I had no one to speak to about it. I began avoiding the living room during their conversations. I sat in my room more. I prayed more. I did not want to argue. I did not want to make anyone uncomfortable. I only wanted to exist. But existence alone was not enough anymore. That is when I first thought, maybe this house is no longer mine. It was not about ownership. It was about belonging. And belonging is not about walls. It is about hearts. And my heart was quietly stepping outside. I will never forget the day when everything truly changed. It was a Sunday afternoon. The house was quiet at first. The rain had stopped, leaving the air damp and cool. I had spent the morning preparing a small snack, tea and some biscuits, hoping Saad and Sana might join me in a quiet moment like we used to. But when I entered the living room with the tray, I froze. They were sitting so close together on the sofa. Laughing. Holding hands, their heads leaned toward each other. And I realized. I had been standing at the doorway for several seconds, unnoticed. I placed the tray on the table quietly. No one looked up, no one offered a seat. The conversation continued without me. I stood there. Silent. Watching. The warmth of the tea in my hands suddenly felt heavy. My heart beat fast. But not with anger, with a strange, quiet ache I could not name. Saad finally glanced in my direction. "Mom," he said casually, "do you want to sit?" His voice was calm, polite, but it lacked the warmth it once carried. I nodded and moved slowly to the sofa. I sat at the edge, careful not to disturb them. Sana smiled softly. "Mom," she said, "can I pour your tea?" I shook my head gently. "I can manage, son," I said. And that was it. The moment passed. I tried to join the conversation. I made a small comment about the weather, a harmless joke. Saad nodded, Sana smiled politely. And then the laughter returned between them. That I did not understand the joke, that I was not part of it. And that was the first time I truly felt it in my bones. I was invisible, not by design, not by cruelty, but by the quiet, natural flow of their world. And I realized my place had shifted. It was no longer central. Later that evening, I stayed in the kitchen longer than usual. I washed the dishes slowly. I cleaned surfaces I did not need to clean. I told myself I was keeping busy. But deep down, I was avoiding the living room. I could hear their laughter through the thin walls. It cut deeper than I could explain. Every giggle, every whisper of a shared secret, reminded me that I was standing outside. I thought back to the first years of Saad's life. The mornings he would run to me, laughing, calling my name. The evenings when we shared tea and whispered stories of our day. Those moments were gone. Then came the moment I knew nothing would be the same. Saad had received a call from his office. He excused himself. Sana followed him into their bedroom. I stood alone in the living room. And then I heard it. Their laughter again through the slightly open door. Only this time. It was a different laughter. It was private. Exclusive. Shared in a way that did not include me. I clutched the edge of the sofa, my hands trembling slightly. That I wanted to leave. I wanted to disappear. But I could not. I could not turn away from the truth. The turning point was not sudden. It was not a fight. It was not a shouting match. It was quiet. It was ordinary. It was a shared moment between my son and his wife that made me realize I no longer belonged here in the same way I once did. I went to my room that night. Sat on the edge of my bed. Picked up an old photograph. Saad's my hand in his tiny face smiling up at me. I whispered softly, "Where did I go? When did this happen?" No answer came. And I knew there would be none. Days passed, but the weight of that moment did not lift. Sana and Saad continued their life together. Their routines became seamless. Their shared jokes, shared meals, shared plans, all without me. I tried to hide the hurt. I smiled. I helped with the house quietly. I prayed silently. But the truth was clear. I was no longer at the center of this home. I was on the edges. Watching. It happened one afternoon that I would never forget. I had prepared Saad's favorite dish. A small gesture of love. Something I knew he enjoyed. I called them to the table. Saad walked in, glanced at the food, and smiled politely. Sana's eyes lit up. But then Saad said softly, "Mom, we just had lunch together earlier. We're not hungry now." I nodded. I smiled. I set the dish aside. And for the first time, the silence that followed was unbearable. That evening, I found myself sitting on the sofa, alone. The house full of lights, warmth, and movement. And yet, I was a ghost. I looked around the room. Every corner held memories of Saad as a child. Every surface held small traces of the life we had shared. And I realized, those memories were mine alone now. No one else would share them. Sana came into the living room at one point, holding a book. "Mom," she said softly, "would you like to sit with me?" I nodded, but her smile was careful, her words were polite. But the warmth, the familiarity, was not there. I realized she was building her own world. And I was standing at the doorway, quietly, carefully, hoping not to intrude. That night, as I prayed quietly, I whispered to myself, "This is the hardest part of love. Watching those you love create new spaces, new routines, new bonds, and realizing your own place is shrinking." The day it truly broke me. I still remember every detail. It was a quiet afternoon. I had spent the morning tidying the house. I wanted everything to feel calm. Maybe, I thought, if everything is in its place, the heart will feel lighter too. I carried a small tray of snacks, tea and a few biscuits. I imagined sitting with Saad and Sanaa, sharing a quiet moment. I imagined laughter I could still be a part of. But when I entered the living room, they were sitting together. So close. So happy. Laughing at something I did not understand. Their world existed completely without me. And I realized in that moment, I was no longer needed. I stood at the doorway and my hands shook slightly. The tray felt heavier than my heart. Sanaa noticed me finally. "Oh, Mom, would you like some tea?" she asked politely. That I nodded, placing the tray down. Saad glanced at me briefly. "Mom, come sit," he said. I moved to the sofa slowly. Sat at the edge. Their laughter continued. I tried to join in a small comment about the weather. It went unnoticed. The truth hit me like a silent blow. I was no longer part of their shared world. Not through malice. Not through cruelty. But through love itself. Their love for each other had quietly edged me aside. Later that evening, I found myself in my room. I sat on the edge of the bed. Picked up an old photo of Saad as a child. His tiny hand in mine, his soft smile. The boy who had once depended on me completely. And I whispered, "Where did I go? How did this happen?" No answer came. I knew there would be none. Days went by, and the quiet grew heavier. The house was full. The life continued. But I felt absent. Sanaa and Saad moved seamlessly through their routines. Shared jokes, shared plans, shared meals. All without me. I tried to hide the pain. I smiled. I helped quietly. I prayed silently. But the heart knows its own pain. One evening, I overheard a conversation that pierced deeper than anything before. Sanaa was speaking softly to her mother over the phone. "Yes, Mom, she is kind, but she's different. Not difficult. Just not part of our world. Different." I could not breathe for a moment. The word echoed inside me. I left the room quietly. Did not listen further. I did not need to. That night, as I prayed, tears ran quietly down my face. Not because of anger. Not because of hate. But because of love. I had given my life to my son. Raised him alone. Sacrificed everything for his happiness. And now, I was realizing that love had quietly moved on without me. The turning point arrived fully the next morning. I decided to prepare a small breakfast. I wanted it to feel like a family moment. I called Saad and Sanaa to the table. Saad entered, glanced at the food, and smiled politely. Sanaa's eyes lit up with gratitude. But then Saad said softly, "Mom, we just had breakfast together. We're not hungry now." I nodded, smiled, set the food aside. And at that moment, the truth crystallized. I was no longer central to their daily lives. I was no longer part of their small shared moments. I was invisible. Later that afternoon, I sat on the sofa, holding a cup of tea. The house was full of light, movement, and life. But I felt absent. Sanaa and Saad were together in the living room. Laughing. Talking. Their shared energy flowed between them. I watched quietly, smiled softly. But inside something broke completely. I realized I had been trying to disappear for weeks, maybe months. I avoided the living room during their conversations. I withdrew into my room. I pretended to be busy. I prayed quietly. All to avoid the truth. I no longer belonged at the heart of my son's life. That evening I finally spoke. I waited until they were both in the living room. My voice was quiet, trembling slightly. "Saad." "Sanaa. I need to say something." Saad looked at me, concerned. Sanaa's smile was polite but curious. I took a deep breath. "Sometimes, I feel invisible in my own home." The room fell silent. The kind of silence that carries weight. Saad's eyes widened slightly. Sanaa looked down. I continued softly. "I have loved you both. I have worked for you both." I raised Saad with all my heart. "But now, I feel like I am no longer part of this home. Like my place has shifted away." Saad tried to speak, Mom, no, that's not true. I gently raised my hand. Please, just listen. I told them about the laughter I watched, the meals that went unnoticed, the small decisions made without me, the quiet moments where I felt pushed aside. Sanaa's eyes filled with tears. She whispered softly, Mom, I never meant to hurt you. And I nodded. I know that it is not about intention, it is about reality. The truth I must accept. That was the moment everything shifted. It was not dramatic. There was no shouting, no anger. Just truth. I realized I had loved selflessly, that I had given my life for my son. But his life was no longer just mine to share. And I had to accept that. That night, I sat alone in my room. The house hummed with their presence. Their laughter had softened, but it was still there. I placed my hand on my chest. Felt the ache. Felt the love. Felt the grief. And I whispered softly, this is the turning point. I must accept that life moves on, even if it leaves me on the edges. After the turning point, the house felt different. Not empty. Not cold. But shifted. I no longer felt central, but I also realized I could still exist here without pain controlling my heart. The first days after I spoke, my feelings were quiet. Saad watched me carefully. He no longer tried to fill the space for me. He waited for me to move in my own rhythm. Sanaa. She was gentler, her voice softer, her steps slower when she passed by my room. She seemed to understand the quiet ache I carried. I began noticing small things I had ignored before. A cup left where I liked it, a blanket folded the way I preferred. Even small conversations with Saad that included me in minor details. It was not dramatic, it was not loud. But it was enough. I realized something important. I could still love them, that I could still care for them. Even if my place in their life was smaller. Love does not always require centrality. It sometimes means letting go. Quietly, gently, without bitterness. One morning, Saad came to my room. He sat on the edge of my bed. Mom, he said softly, I didn't realize. I didn't see how you were feeling. I am sorry. I looked at him. The boy I had raised. Now a man. His eyes were full of concern, love, and regret. It's okay, son, I said gently. It is not your fault. It is just life-changing. We all have to find our new places in it. That afternoon, Sanaa knocked on my door. Mom, she said softly, would you like to join me for tea? I paused, then I nodded. Yes, son. We sat together at the small table in the kitchen. The tea was warm. The biscuits slightly sweet. And for the first time in weeks I felt included. It was not grand, it was not perfect. But it was enough. Over the next few days, I began finding my rhythm again. I spent mornings preparing small things for Saad. I did not expect gratitude, I did not expect acknowledgement, I only did it because it felt like love. Sometimes they noticed, sometimes they did not. And that was okay. I also began spending time on myself. Reading books I had left aside. Sitting by the window, watching the rain. Praying quietly without expectation. The house still felt full. But my heart was learning to feel whole within itself. One evening, Saad came into my room quietly. Mom, he said softly, I realize now. I took your presence for granted. I thought you were always there. And maybe I forgot that you need to be seen too. I smiled. That it was not resentment I felt, it was understanding. And love. Son, I said gently, I have always loved you and I will always love you, but life moves forward, and love sometimes changes shape. That is okay. Sanaa also began to involve me in small ways. She would ask my advice about meals. She would sit near me while folding laundry. She would occasionally laugh at something I said. It was not the closeness of the past, it was not a return to old patterns. But it was connection. And connection, even small, heals. I began reflecting on what had happened. I realized that I had learned something important. Life does not always center around you. People you love grow. People you raise create their own worlds. And it is natural for them to sometimes leave you on the edges. But edges are not empty. Edges are quiet spaces where observation, reflection, and love still exist. One afternoon, I watched Saad and Sanaa laughing in the living room. I did not feel hurt, that I did not feel invisible. Felt love. Quiet love. Love that did not need to dominate. Love that simply existed alongside theirs. I began to find joy in small acts of care. Preparing a meal just the way Saad liked. Folding laundry while listening to their conversation. Sitting quietly near them while they laughed. I realized that I did not need to be central to experience love. I only needed to feel it in my heart. Over time, the laughter that once hurt me became soothing. I began smiling along, quietly joining in the rhythm of their lives. Not in the center. Not as the main character. But as part of the tapestry. And that was enough. One evening, Saad came to me with a small gift. "Mom," he said, "thank you for always being here. Even when I was unaware. Even when I was lost in my own life, that I love you." I held his hands in mine. Tears filled my eyes. Not of sadness. Not of pain. But of gratitude. "I love you too, son," I whispered. "And I always will." That night I sat by my window. The house full of warmth, quiet laughter, and life. I realized I had found peace. I had let go of the pain of exclusion. I had accepted the new reality. I had embraced love in a different form. This resolution was not about dramatic reconciliation. It was not about being in the center again. It was about acceptance. It was about quiet strength. It was about recognizing that love is not ownership. Love is presence, even if it is subtle. Even if it is gentle. Even if it is sometimes on the edges. And in that moment, I understood fully. I did not need to belong in the same way I once had, that I was still part of this family, I was still loved, I was still relevant. Not always seen. Not always acknowledged. But always present in the heart. After those first quiet moments of acceptance, I began noticing the small ways life could still include me without forcing it. I prepared breakfast quietly some mornings, and instead of expecting Saad or Sanaa to notice, I simply enjoyed the act. Sometimes Saad would glance up and smile. Sometimes Sanaa would ask me a small question. Those little acknowledgments became like sunlight through the clouds. I realized that the heart does not need constant attention to be full. It only needs space to breathe, coexist, or love quietly. I began joining them in small ways, without expectation or control. Sometimes I sat nearby while they watched television. Sometimes I quietly cleared the table after dinner. Sometimes I laughed at a joke, even if I didn't fully understand it. The house, once a place that reminded me of what I had lost, slowly became warm again. Not the same warmth as before, not the old center of my son's life, but a gentler, quieter warmth that allowed me to be present in my own way. I also spent more time speaking gently with Sanaa. Not about duties or house rules, but about small things. "How was your day, son? Did you enjoy your work today?" She began responding in kind. Sometimes she laughed softly at something I said. Sometimes she asked me for advice about meals or organizing. Our bond grew slowly, carefully. It was not the closeness of the past, but it was a bridge, a new connection built on understanding, respect, and quiet affection. Saad noticed the change in me too. He came one evening while I was folding laundry. "Mom," he said gently, "I see you, and I realize I sometimes forget to include you, that I want you to know. You are always important to me." I smiled softly. "I know, son, and that is enough." I did not need him to fix anything. I only needed him to understand, to acknowledge the quiet ache I had carried. I began finding joy in the subtle rhythms of life again. The morning sun spilling through the curtains. The scent of tea brewing. Saad's soft footsteps returning from work. Sanaa humming while folding clothes. I realized that life is not always in grand gestures. It is in small, ordinary moments. And even if I am not at the center, I am still part of it. One afternoon, I watched Saad and Sanaa laughing in the living room. I felt no pain, no hurt, no jealousy. Instead, I felt love. Not a love that demands attention or centrality, but a quiet love that exists alongside theirs, the love that has room for growth, for distance, for change. I also began reflecting on my own life. I realized I had spent so many years shaping the lives of others, loving them fully and giving everything. And now it was okay to step back and care for myself too. Not in selfishness, but in the quiet strength of presence. I began spending mornings by the window, drinking tea, watching the garden, reading books I had left aside. I prayed more, I reflected more, and I felt peace. The more I embraced this new perspective, the more Saad and Sana responded. Sana would involve me in small decisions. Saad would occasionally ask for my opinion. Sometimes they simply sat near me, laughing together, allowing me to be present without saying a word. It was subtle, it was slow. But it was connection. And it healed the invisible ache I had carried for months. I began understanding that love is not always about being in the center. Sometimes love is quiet. Sometimes love is presence without possession. Sometimes love means letting go. And sometimes it means finding joy in the edges of life while still holding the people you care about close in your heart. One evening, as the rain fell softly outside, I watched Saad and Sana together. I felt a gentle warmth that I whispered to myself. This is the turning point of my heart. I have accepted the new rhythm of life. I have let go of resentment and embraced presence. And I realized that peace does not require attention. It only requires love. Steady, quiet, and enduring. From that moment on, the house felt different. Not emptier. Not distant. But balanced. Saad, Sana, and I coexisted in harmony. Not the same closeness as before, but a deeper, more understanding connection. I learned that belonging is not always about being in the center. It is about being present, being loved, and being grateful for the love that remains. The house had changed, that I had changed. And the way I saw life had changed too. It was no longer about control or presence or being in the center. It was about love. Quiet, patient, enduring love that did not demand attention but existed regardless. I woke up one morning and sat by the window with a cup of tea. The garden glistened from last night's rain. The sunlight reflected off the leaves, the world felt peaceful. And I felt content. Saad entered quietly. "Mom," he said, "would you like some breakfast?" I smiled. "Yes, son. That would be lovely." He placed the tray on the table. Sana followed with a small bowl of fresh fruit. We sat together. No loud conversation, no interruptions. Just a quiet shared moment. And for the first time in months I felt included. Truly included. I reflected on the journey that had brought me here. From the first moments of subtle exclusion, the small, quiet adjustments of the household, the invisible ache I had carried silently, to the turning point when I finally voiced my heart. It had been painful, it had been lonely, it had been necessary. Pain, I realized, often teaches us the deepest lessons. And quiet loneliness can reveal the strength of our hearts. Sana came to me one afternoon, holding a tray of tea. "Mom," she said softly, "I wanted to ask, how can I help you feel more comfortable?" Her words, gentle and sincere, touched me deeply. I smiled softly. "Son, I am learning. And you are learning too. We are finding our way together, that is enough." We sipped tea quietly. And for the first time I felt that our relationship had transformed. Not into the past, but into something stronger, gentler, and more understanding. Saad entered, noticing us sitting quietly. "Mom," he said gently, "I know I was unaware before. I didn't realize how you felt, but I promise. I will always make space for you, not as a guest, but as the heart of this home in your own way." I held his hand softly. "Son, I know you love me. And that is enough. No more need for words." The heart understood. I began noticing small changes every day. Saad would include me in small decisions like grocery shopping or plans for the weekend. Sana would occasionally ask my opinion about meals or arrangements. Even laughter at the dinner table began to include me naturally. It was not the same as before, it was different. But it was meaningful. And it healed me. I realized that life, in its quiet way, has a rhythm we cannot control. People we love grow, change, and create new spaces. Our role in their lives may shift. And that is not lost, it is transformation. I understood finally that belonging is not always about centrality, it is about presence. quiet, steady, enduring presence. One evening, I sat by the window watching Saad and Sanaa in the garden. They laughed together, helping each other with small chores. I watched quietly. And instead of feeling hurt or left out, I felt gratitude. Gratitude for my son, gratitude for my daughter-in-law, gratitude for the love we still shared, even in this new form. I began journaling my thoughts quietly each morning. I wrote about my memories with Saad, about the small, invisible sacrifices I had made, and about the quiet joy I found in the present. Writing helped me understand myself. It helped me process the invisible ache. It helped me embrace the quiet truth. Life moves forward. Love moves forward. And our hearts adapt if we allow them to. One afternoon, Saad came to me while I was reading. "Mom," he said softly, "thank you for everything you've done. For your patience, your love, your care. I know I sometimes fail to notice, but I want you to know. You are the foundation of my life." I held back tears. Not of sadness. Not of regret. But of deep, quiet gratitude. "Son," I said softly, "I am proud of you and I love you. Always, nothing can change that." Sanaa joined us with a small plate of sweets. "Mom," she said gently, "I want you to feel part of our life, always, that we may laugh and share moments together, but that doesn't mean we forget you." Her words touched me more than I expected. I smiled softly. "Yes, son. I understand. And I am grateful." Over the following weeks, our home settled into a gentle rhythm. The laughter of Saad and Sanaa no longer cut like a sharp knife. It became comforting. It became part of the music of the house. And I existed quietly alongside it. No longer invisible, but accepted in a new, softer way. I reflected on my journey. From feeling invisible to expressing my hurt, to accepting the new reality, to finding peace. I realized that the most important lesson is this. Love is not possession. Love does not demand centrality. Love is about presence, care, understanding, and acceptance. Even if life shifts around you, even if roles change, even if you feel invisible at times, the heart can still find its place. I also realized that forgiveness is essential. Forgiveness is not about condoning mistakes. It is about releasing the weight of hurt. It is about opening the heart again, even if the world has changed. I forgave myself for feeling pain. That I forgave Saad for unintentionally excluding me. I forgave Sanaa for adjusting her life around her new family. And in that forgiveness, found freedom. One evening I stood at the doorway, watching Saad and Sanaa together. I did not feel jealousy. That I did not feel sorrow. That I felt love. Quiet, steady, enduring love. The kind that does not need to dominate or demand attention. The kind that simply exists and grows and sustains life. I whispered softly, "I may not be at the center, but I am here. That I am loved. That I am grateful, and that is enough." The house, once a place of invisible ache, had become a place of gentle connection. We laughed together sometimes. That we shared meals. We worked quietly alongside one another. We prayed. That we cared. And we existed. In love, in understanding, in acceptance. I realized finally that life is a series of changes. People move, hearts grow, and homes shift. But love endures. It adapts. It softens the edges. It allows us to belong, even if differently than before. And I understood. I was no longer invisible. I belonged, quietly, lovingly, unshakably, in this family. Days passed, and the rhythm of our home settled into a gentle flow. I began noticing how small moments could bring quiet joy. A cup of tea prepared for Saad in the morning. Sanaa humming softly while folding clothes. Saad pausing to ask me my opinion on something minor. These were not grand gestures. But they were enough. Enough to remind me that I was part of their lives. Not always central. Not always acknowledged, but present. I started spending more time in the garden. Watching birds perch on the fence. Feeling sunlight on my hands as I tended small plants. Sometimes Saad would join me. Sometimes Sanaa would bring out a small tray of snacks. We spoke quietly about life, work, and memories. I realized that connection does not always need grand events. It is the simple, everyday moments that weave a family together. One evening, I found myself sitting by the living room window, sipping tea. Saad and Sana were laughing together quietly. I did not feel hurt this time. I did not feel invisible. I felt gratitude. Gratitude that they were happy. Gratitude that I could still witness their joy. Gratitude that my love had not disappeared, even if my role had changed. I reflected on my own journey. I had spent so many years giving my heart completely. Raising Saad alone. Sacrificing time, energy, and sometimes even my own happiness. And though it had hurt to feel invisible, I realized that love is not possession, it is not control, it does not demand constant recognition, it is a quiet, enduring force that persists even when life shifts. Sana joined me one afternoon, bringing a tray of tea and cookies. "Mom," she said softly, "I want you to feel comfortable here, not like a guest, but like part of our life." Her words warmed my heart. "Yes, son," I said gently. "I feel it already, thank you for understanding." We sat quietly together, sipping tea, sharing a small smile. Saad came to me later, sitting beside me on the sofa. "Mom," he said quietly, "I know I didn't always notice how you felt, but I want you to know. You are the heart of my life. Even if I sometimes get lost in my own world, you will always be important to me." I held his hand softly. "I know, son, that I have always known, and I love you, always." I began to embrace the quiet spaces in the house. The living room where laughter echoed. The kitchen where meals were prepared and shared. The garden where we tended plants together. I no longer felt excluded, that I no longer felt invisible. I felt present. I felt part of life in my own way. I began journaling again. I wrote about my memories, that I wrote about the moments that had hurt me. And I wrote about the small joys that had returned. Writing helped me understand myself. It helped me accept the subtle truth. Love endures, even when life shifts. Belonging is not always about centrality. It is about presence, patience, and quiet understanding. Weeks later, I sat in the living room with Saad and Sana. We were laughing quietly together, sharing a small story from our day. The warmth of the house wrapped around us. I realized that peace is not found in grand gestures. It is found in these quiet, ordinary moments. And for the first time in months, I felt completely whole. I reflected on what I had learned. Life changes, people grow. Roles shift. And yet, love can remain, even when it moves to the edges. Even when it is quiet. Even when it feels invisible. Love endures. And that is enough. I looked at Saad, then at Sana. I whispered softly to myself, "I may not be the center, but I am here, that I am loved, that I am part of this family, and I am grateful." The house felt alive, warm, and full. Not the way it once was, but in a deeper, gentler way. Sometimes at night I sit by my window. I watch the moonlight spill across the garden. I hear Saad and Sana laughing quietly together. I do not feel lonely anymore. I feel love. Not demanding. Not controlling. Not central. But present. And that presence is enough. I realized finally that life is not about holding on. It is about letting go. Letting others grow. Letting love shift its shape. And still holding it in your heart. The ache I had felt for months. The feeling of invisibility. It has transformed into quiet strength. I smiled softly to myself. The house was full of life, that I was part of it. And I belonged. Quietly, gently, enduringly. This was the lesson I had learned. Love endures. Life moves forward. And the heart adapts. Beautifully, quietly, forever.